Hi everyone. So it has now been exactly 30 days since the tragic quadruple homicide in Moscow. And what I wanted to do in this video is, instead of focusing our attention on speculation about who did the murder, I wanted to take the facts of the case, like what we know specifically about the manner of death, and kind of work backwards to develop a profile of the killer or killers. I'm starting with a recent interview that Kaylee Goncalves, one of the victims' father, Steve, gave to Fox News Digital, where he talked about the actual wounds that were inflicted on his daughter through conversations that he had had with the coroner, Kathy Mabott, the Latah County coroner. Steve told Fox News Digital that the victims had big open gouges that were clearly the work of a sadistic male. He talks about how he asked Kathy, the coroner, how many times the victims were stabbed, and Kathy told him, "Sir, I don't think stabs is the right word. It was like tears, like this was a strong weapon, not like a stab." So knowing that the victims died of multiple stab wounds, I went ahead and did some research on multiple stabbing deaths. And I found 3 different studies that have been conducted, and I'll link to the studies in the description of the video here. But I wanted to go through some of the information that I found in these studies that I think will help paint a clear picture of the profile of the individual or individuals who might have done these horrible crimes. So one of the studies was published in the Journal of Forensic and Legal Medicine, and it looks like it was published back in 2012. And was conducted by a number of forensic pathologists in Europe. They analyzed a sample of 766 homicides. They found that stabbing led to death in 206 of them, of which 96 were single stabbing and 110 involved multiple stabbing. So when they talk about sex-related murders or homicides, they don't necessarily have to involve the act of sex or any kind of sexual activity. They say that the presence of sexual motivation for committing homicide strongly coincides with instances of multiple stabbing, even more so than in any other method of homicide. The association between multiple stabbing and sex-related homicides rises in accordance with an increase in the number of stab wounds per victim. This is important because in the case of the Idaho homicides, we know that there was multiple stabbings. We know that 3 of the 4 victims were women, so we have to assume that the perpetrator had some kind of sexual intent, an emotional sexual intent. It's the opinion of the writers of the paper that if a person suffering from schizophrenia can be found near or in the vicinity of the victim, this person should be at the very least considered to be a possible suspect in the homicide. The recommendation would be that law enforcement should maybe look at all the individuals in that general Moscow area that have diagnosed schizophrenia and go through them one by one and rule them out as potential suspects. Another interesting point is the role that jealousy plays. Jealousy has been proven to be a dominant characteristic among circumstances that lead to homicide. 45% of the multiple stabbing homicides that they studied were linked in some way to jealousy. It was concluded by the authors of the paper that long-term dissatisfaction upon the part of the assailant culminated in an effective emotional homicide during which sexual excitement was achieved by repeatedly stabbing the victim, fully aware of the victim's suffering. In a sense, you can think of this like the stabbing motion is almost as if the assailant is achieving some kind of sexual gratification from that. There's another study that was done back in 1991. It was published in Forensic Science International. They talk about the breakdown between male and female assailants, and they found that stabbing is by far the most common way for women to commit homicide. They talk about the reasons why an individual inflicts multiple stab wounds. We talked about the emotional side of it, the sexual gratification side. There's other reasons though. One may be the determination on the part of the assailant to make sure that the victim is dead or will not recover. Another reason for multiple stab wounds may be because the victim goes on fighting despite having received many stab wounds. And actually in several of the cases studied, victims have seen to be still fighting after having as many as 15 to 20 stab wounds. We understand from some of the information that's been put out in the public sphere that there did appear to be some kind of defensive wounds on some of the victims. Lastly, there was a more recent study done, this one in 2019. They actually do some psychological analysis on the motivations behind the act of homicide. Offenders make the decision to use coercive actions by making, quote, rational choices after balancing the odds of achieving a desired outcome with the possible cost of engaging in such actions. These rational decisions are often made under duress, in a short period of time, and under the influence of alcohol or some emotion. You can imagine the potential of the assailant or assailants in these crimes possibly being intoxicated. It goes into a whole conversation around what they call weapon retrieval. At the time of the incident, how did the offender get a hold of the particular weapon they used to carry out the homicide? In 82.5% of the cases they studied, offenders carried the weapon with them into the crime scene, whereas in 12% of the cases, the weapon was retrieved from the scene. It may not have been a premeditated event, that being in the environment where there was a weapon available would help influence the decision-making on the part of the assailant to carry out the crime. These are all really interesting studies that kind of get into the psychology of a multiple stabbing homicide. And one would hope that law enforcement, in the case of the Moscow homicides, would be taking some of this into consideration, looking at some of the historical research and data as they try to paint a clearer picture of the suspect or possible suspects. Only time will tell. But until then, thank you for watching.